Hello, everybody, and we're back again today here for a recap on Lecture 2 Motivation. We're going to look at the works of Albert Bandura in terms of social learning theory with the Bobadal experiments, to which we've done in class. You guys have a video on that. You can use that video at your disposal, and obviously run through some of the stuff that maybe we got to do in class, but maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing to have a look at it again. So the social learning theory, really looking at the emphasis of what children see they tend to mimic, and that can be both positive and negative. So in that light, it's important to make sure when we are speaking of the theoretical framework around the social learning theory that it can have both positive and negative implications. So I'm going to continue to where we left off with the set of notes in relation to motivation, lecture 2, and we looked at Bandura's pieces of research. We had another look at some of the social status. We got to the types of motivation, both intrinsic and extrinsic. We looked at forms of motivation in terms of positive and negative motivation. And then we got to the theoretical frameworks of motivation, which is where your piece of work for week 3 has come into play. So we looked at self-determination, participant or trait-centered theory. We looked at situation-centered theory, and then we looked at the interactional theory as well. So self-determination theory, we spoke about Edward Deasy and Richard Ryan earlier, in the diploma, and again the work here in relation to self-determination has come up. The concept, the idea, the purpose of having autonomous self-regulation of behavior is key, and definitely one of the things that you will be trying to illustrate in more modern terms of your own coaching style or coaching practice, whether that be through exercise or in sports-based interventions. So again, we had a little discussion about the concept around sports psychologists and the idea around mental fitness training, coaches in the same terms. And again, we come up with the same conclusion that really you're there to tool athletes up, to give them skills that they can then use without your use as such or without you being present, and therefore learning has taken place, and that they can actually go on and use these skills individually, or as the self-determination theory suggests, autonomously. Again, why would that leave sports psychologists out of a job? Well, it would mean that you've limited time in terms of working with athletes, and that they're not on a constant retainer with you. So we looked at the journey of self-determination. We spoke briefly about what autonomy is, the competency element of autonomy, and then relatedness. And then I told you about a friend of mine who was conditioned to shut up and ask no questions, was part of a group of successful athletes, but the coach, when this person was playing, didn't want questions, didn't want interaction, didn't want initiation of interaction. So therefore it left them or the group in a particular difficult position to be able to express themselves fully. So it wasn't a case of them being able to freely communicate. What it was more so, sadly for them, was that it was a situation of autocratic leadership that didn't really attest to openness to people being able to question, etc. So the structure, autonomy, support, and involvement we looked at as well. And then we spoke about what they are, or how they are captured within the journey to self-determination. We looked at professional coaches serve as masterful supporters of athlete autonomy and self-determination. So according to Bandura, we looked at self-efficacy then again, the beliefs, the previous experiences, vicarious experiences, imagined experiences, verbal persuasion, and then the physiological or emotional states that go with Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory. Outcomes of it then again are what we spoke about within class. And then we said what will happen when you have high autonomous motivation, or high autonomous motivation leads to greater persistence for athletes. It leads to more interest and enjoyment because they feel that they're part of the process, more flexible and creativity within their own practices, better physical health then again because it can tie into physical as well as emotional health, better heuristic performance, so all round better performance, testing to and questioning everything within their performance, higher quality of close personal relationships, so trust is built and I guess it's cemented with the relationship of the coach and the athletes, which is terrific as well. Better mental health and well-being. Of course, if you're training better, you're feeling better, well then chances are that you'll be in a better position then to go forward again. So conclusions for the self-determination theory, findings are consistent no matter what age, socioeconomic status and culture. So again, research redone in 2013 has kind of led us to that. Human beings are wired to thrive, and when granted the opportunity to engage in behaviour that is of personal interest and value, around which they are able to have a sense of competency. So we all want to feel like we are competent when they feel cared for and connected to other human beings on the self journey to determination. The participant-centered or trait-centered view is that we're motivated primarily as a function of individual characteristics. Again, it would be easy for us to get into a conversation based around personality, but actually, when we look at topic 3, we'll be doing a lot of information. We'll be looking at a lot of information, in relation to personality. We'll be delving into the personality of different athletes within sport, and then we'll be looking at why or how they may have transpired to success on the field and what has happened off the field for these athletes. The situation-centered motivated behavior is primarily determined by the situation. So I gave you the example of the Stanford Prison Experiment as one of them. You guys will have went off and watched this, had a little bit of an insight into what happens in these situations of authority and obedience, which again we would have spoke about, we would have seen earlier with the Milgram studies. The interactional-centered view, then, as you can imagine, if we have one that's trait-centered, we have one that's situation-centered. Well, actually, what we come up here with this next one then is the interaction of both of them. So it's a result of the participants' factors and situational factors. So really, it's going back to what we spoke about in week 1. We've got our biological antecedents, we've got all of these things that are predisposed to us, autogenic stuff, and they're all of our natural biological sources. So it's actually what happens when you take them, when you take the genetics, when you take the biology, when you take all of that, and then you mix it into a situation and how people interact in them situations. Now, what often goes astray or goes awry is that actually what we see or what we find with these things is that it's difficult at times to relay back these messages of importance, and these messages of importance are simple. The situation with the personality or the biological implications of the personality will get us greater understanding. But, and this is a really big but, the experiences prior to the experience you're in now will also have a say. So what we find here, what we see here is that it isn't nature versus nurture. In fact, it's probably nature and nurture. Here's a little diagram of the interactional view of motivation. So obviously you can see on the right hand side the leaders or the coach's style, the facility attractiveness, team winner loss record. And what I like about facility attractiveness, I spoke to a colleague of mine who's a sports psychologist in America, and when we actually looked at this, we looked at it with a very latent. We looked at it with a very latent approach. We didn't just look at it and say the word faculty. We didn't just think of, look at it in terms of the what's there physically. We looked at it and we thought, well, do you know what? It's that question that I asked to you guys as students, you guys as athletes, you guys as people. What is your feeling when you're showing up for a training session? How do people feel when they're showing up for a training session? So actually, the attractiveness to your facility or your faculty as such probably comes down to how they're feeling going into it. You've got that really good analogy within, I think it's one of the Rocky movies where, Rocky is out training in the, mountains with snow and all of these other things, whereas I think the Russian competitor is in this high class facilities, probably taking on a little bit of steroid use, etc., in the top of the range facilities. But really, it's more about how you feel when you're going into these facilities or you're going into these situations then again. So it's an interesting breakdown there when we look at the words, and it's good to be it's really good for you guys to have latent approaches to these things. I think I think so that the main thing for you guys here is start to use this latent facility. Start using this latent approach where you see a word and you say, I'm going to investigate this. I'm not just going to look at it for the sake of it. So again, having that latency approach to it is important. Okay. So your personality on the left hand side with the needs and the interests, that will obviously play a role within it then again. You've got to be aware of that. You've got to be aware of how they work your personality traits with what are the needs. So what are our personal needs? And again, you could go right back to the biological elements of that, or you could step back and look at the physiological elements. But again, there's lots of different things that we need on a physiological level and what we need on a biological level. So it is important then again. So 5 steps in building motivation. We spoke about some of these already. I'm going to run through them for you there again. Consider both the environment and the personality. So following on from what we've looked at there, asking them how they feel when they arrive to training, asking them how they feel when they arrive to games, what type of feelings are attached to it, what type of thoughts or emotions are attached. Obviously, coronavirus has changed a lot of that for athletes. At the minute, there's only the elite end of sport and athletes that I'm currently involved with at the moment. Even, let's say we're playing an away game, even something like getting onto the bus, like the stringent protocol that's there because of COVID-19 has certainly changed most people's feelings about how they approach things. And something simple like, you're sitting on a bus, but people can't sit beside you. You've got to observe the 2 meter rule of tall possible. So therefore, you're probably on a double decker bus as opposed to a single. And it creates a different type of feeling for you. It creates that kind of feeling of being alone. So again, I would often say, don't worry too much about what it looks like. Have a look and see what it feels like. Again, coming back to the latency of what we mean. The next one is understand that people have multiple modes for involvement across different sports. And again, you've got this push and pull. I'm sure you've all at one stage come across it one way or another with the concept of multi-sports. So different sports saying that, athletes should only hone in on one up until a certain age or honing is probably not the right way to go. In fact, most of the research tells us that multi-sports is actually a great thing. Soccer players have spoken about how playing basketball has helped them with spatial awareness. It's helped them with decision making. And there's plenty of just transferable skills from one sport to the next. So consistent effort is necessary in order to identify and understand participants' motives for being involved in sport, exercise or educational environments. Gill and Williams concluded that children have a number of motives for sports participation, including skill development, demonstration of competency, as well as challenge, excitement and fun. So there's different little parts of it then again. So the self-determination theory, there's just different parts to it. The need to feel confident. I am good enough to compete at the Olympics. The autonomous level of it then again, can players make decisions without the coaches shouting what to do? The PlayStation controller coach or the Xbox controller coach as I like to call them. Social connectedness or belonging. So Dublin people love wearing GAA gear. Social affiliation is seen there. 15 or 20 years ago we may have seen a lot of it, but probably not as much as we've seen now with the success that they've had then again. Why people compete in soccer? So people participate for more than one reason. They've competing motives for involvement. They may have both shared and unique motives. Motives motives change over time and motives differ across cultures. So we wait for study on motivational climates. 3, as we've went through in quite a lot of detail, and by now I'm hoping that when I come to class on Monday evening, you guys will be able to educate me on the power of the situation, on the power of what happens when we take a good person and we introduce them into a bad place. So you need to use what you learn about your participants to structure the exercise environment to meet their needs. Some like sport to be competitive, while others take up sport for fun. 4, guidelines in terms of influence. So this is one that's more geared obviously towards educators and exercise. So it says that 73% of them consider themselves and their actions to be very important motivational factors for their athletes. So athletes look up to coaches. Athletes look up to physical educators. Athletes look up to personal trainers or physical trainers or whatever people can call themselves. And what's important here, what we need to remember here, is actually that we probably don't have that much as importance as we really believe we do, but yet because we place that emphasis on us as the coach, us as the leader, us as the boss, etc., well, then we put more emphasis on what we have to offer than maybe what they have to offer. Hence, coming back all the way to session one, social interaction, peer to peer learning. Do never be naive enough, nor should you, as a coach, to believe that you've got all of the say over an athlete's development. You do not. They will learn from you, of course. No doubt you've got skills, you've got capacity, you've got leadership aptitude. But what you need to add there is a platform for them to learn from each other. You've got to create a social platform for them to learn from each other. We often hear coaches and educators asking for players to show energy and enthusiasm, but they never show these traits. It illustrates do as I say, not do as I do. Our behavior and actions will ultimately mean more than our words can. They just say, show it. Show me energy, show me passion, show me drive. What does that mean? What does that actually look like? How do you portray it? How do you coach it? How do you get these athletes to see these things? And number five then is having that ability. So again, I mentioned this prior to you guys. I think it was in week 2. It might have been in week 1, but in relation to that, the best coaches, the best teachers, the best educators, and anybody who wants to be a leader of some sort will always have the ability to have the telescope and the microscope handy. You need the telescope to zoom out and see the big picture and be able to see all them different things that are taking place and how are these things interacting with each other. But don't get me wrong, you also need that microscope. And if you have that microscope, then you're in a really, really good position because you can then hone in and look at the smaller things. You can examine the body language. You can look at players' body language. You can see how they're interacting with the rest of the group and how do we ensure them things happen. Well, there's a number of different things we can do, but essentially we've got to look at sessions objectively. We've got to be deliberately looking, observing, viewing these things deliberately. You see these coaches, they set up a little exercise, they turn and they start talking to another coach, or they set up a little game and they turn and they start talking to parents or other coaches. Well, actually, what's that doing to an athlete? So I'm an athlete who's been out of the team for 6 weeks. I've been practicing hard and training hard, like coaches told me, you keep practicing hard, training hard, eventually you'll get your chance. But I haven't played in the last 6 weeks. So essentially when training takes place, what am I looking for? That window, that bracket, that opportunity for the coach to see me portraying what I can offer for the team. But if the coach sets something up and walks away, if the coach sets up an exercise and isn't directly involved in it, that will demotivate your athletes. So you've got to be able to observe the participants, okay? You've got to talk informally to others. Again, it doesn't have to be all formally. This is the time we're meeting at. You've got to be there. You've got to have your gear on. It can be little simple things. Oh yeah, how are you getting on a college job? Brilliant. Yeah, you're in DCU. Oh yeah. I know Anya out there who's delivering the sports, whatever it may be. You interact. You create these actions. You speak about these different things with people. Then again, and it really helps with it. Then you ask participants directly. There's literally no harm in it. I've never ever seen something backfire. I've never seen something be really detrimental to a team when a coach says to his athletes, okay, I just want to find out here. Tell me how you feel about training. Are you motivated when you're coming to training? What do you like about training? What do you not like about training? And coaches, educators, leaders, practitioners have to get comfortable with this. Sometimes what they say will probably be very true, very accurate. It might hurt your feelings a little bit, but if you change what they've asked you to change, they'll know that the process is a two-way process, and the fact that it's a two-way process, that in fact you actually have a really good relationship because you're not just speaking for the sake of it. You have a voice. Athletes, players, coaches, everybody needs to have a voice. Here's some of the major motives for exercise. So again, we do hone in on sports quite a lot actually, but what we need to hone in here is obviously looking at the exercise components of it then again. So initially joining, motives tend to be weight loss, self-challenge, fitness, health factors, feeling better, and then they lead up to, what are the health factors then? Enjoyment, liking the instructor or the coach, liking the type of activity, and then the social factors that are attached to it. So you have to look at both sides of them now, and I'll just give you a second to do that. Look at both sides there. If you were to join a health club, what would you be looking at? Pick one on the left, and then if you were to pick a health, in terms of health factors, what would you be looking at? Okay, so we're going to look at developing a realistic view of motivation. Again, you want to be guarding against the dip. So the D stands for, I'm going to let you answer. The I stands for, I'm going to let you answer. And the P stands for, I'm going to let you answer as well. Okay, so in reality, in consequence to this, it's really, really important to be aware that we need to have a realistic approach to motivation. Not every athlete is going to be able to show up for training sessions and be 100% every single minute of every single session. How do we develop a realistic view? So motivation is a key variable in both learning and performance contexts. Physical and psychological factors beyond motivation influence behavior and must be considered. Some motivational factors are more easily influenced than others. Okay, so we'll look at achievement motivation and competitiveness. Achievement motivation is a person's orientation to strive for task success, persist in the face of failure, and experience pride in accomplishments. Competitiveness then is a disposition to strive for satisfaction when making comparisons with some standard of excellence in the presence of an evaluative others. So again, competitiveness, obviously there is test elements. It's a test element to it. And when we have tests, regardless of what they are, we tend to have tiny little bit of thing called test anxiety. But in fact, if you were to look deeper, again, if you were to approach it with a latent hat on, you would probably find actually that competitiveness, yes, there is a tiny element of anxiety that's there, but can we reframe that and look at it as a level of arousal? Is it the body preparing itself to go into competition, to go into a game, to go into a match? So again, maybe we need to just reframe that on a physiological standpoint. What are the keys here? Well, achievement motivation tends to be self-comparison of achievements. So you're looking at yourself, whereas competitiveness is social evaluation or comparison. You're then comparing it with, another person as such. Whereas that fourth part is probably a larger construct of what we're looking at, because you remember what I'm saying. We are looking at self-determination theory as one of the major components, and we're just asking that question. We're not saying that it's definitely it. We're just asking that question. We're saying achievement motivation, self-comparison. Why is that such an important thing? And why and how do we get athletes to start self-comparing themselves with an evaluative hat on, with an evaluative tool, so that it's objective, because we can be our own worst critics at times as well. Okay. Okay, so the next part then is influences on this are choice of the activity that we choose, effort to pursue goals, intensity of effort, okay, and then persistence in the face of failure. Persistence in the face of failure. That's an interesting one. Okay, so moving it on, we're going to look at attribution theory. It's a major factor. It's one that I often give the example of students with, because it's a good one for students. It was me as a student, maybe, or certainly a couple of friends that I have who are students, because you get to tell the tale of attribution in a really clear way, a really clear way. And that's the main thing, like, because we often look at a game and people will come away from a game and say, well, we lost that because of the referee. So it's an interesting saying, isn't it? People complain about referees' decisions and choices. And it's easy to attribute our failures to things that maybe shouldn't be attributed to. So, in that sense, we should probably be able to view it and look at it as something where we're creating, like I said, pride psychology, personal responsibility in delivering excellence, accountability. So, how people explain their successes and failure. Is it stable? Is it from a stability point of view? Is it the local locus of causality? And is it the locus of control? And we'll look at them now, so don't worry too much about them. The stability element is, basic attributions are broken into stability. Are they stable or unstable? Your locus of control, so that's either internal locus of control or external locus of control. So you'll be able to make a decision based off them as well as you go forward in terms of your locus control. So there's parts of it that you'll be able to look at and understand, and then there's other parts that maybe won't be as clear for you either because they take help from significant others, i.e., coaches or people who are authentic sources of information. So you want to get better as an athlete. You got to be careful with where you're going for advice from people. So you want to get better as an athlete, you go to a specialist in that area. Again, these seem like basic things, but our locus of causality plays a big one. And then our locus of control, the way we view it. So is it in our control or is it out of one's control? So sometimes there is things that happen. Uh, a deflection, the ball goes in a direction that it shouldn't. But the reality is that, we should try to be aware of some of the downsides, some of the faults, some of the issues around your locus of control then again, okay, guys? So that would be a major construct. Attributions and achievement motivation. So you've got the stable internal cause in one's control, the psychological results. It can increase expectations of success. It can increase pride or shame. It can increase motivation as well. So what's the outcome orientation? So our competitive goal orientation focuses on comparing performance with that of others and defeating others then again. So looking solely at the result, it's a major way to do that. Focuses on proving relative to one's own past performances is the task goal. Again, if we're looking at how we achieve, and if you think about, let's say, sprinters, Olympic sprinters per se, they will often be looking to beat their time as opposed to beating another person as such. Social goal orientations focuses on judging competence in terms of affiliation with the group of recognition and recognition of being liked by others. So again, I gave you the example of Dublin GAA. Everybody likes to be affiliated because of their success. Um, or a lot of people like to be affiliated, excuse me. Achievement goal theory then, we look at the achievement goals, the perceived ability, and then the achievement behavior. So our outcome orientated goals and our task orientated goals, you add them to our perceived ability. So if you've got a high perceived ability or competence, or if you have low perceived ability or competence, it will lead to the following. So it will give you your performance level, it will determine your effort, it will determine whether you're persistent, and then it will determine on your task choice as well. So are they realistic tasks or opponents, and then are they unrealistic then again? So you would think about genetics within, let's say, 100-meter sprinter again, and would a current 100-meter sprinter in Ireland be able to compete against somebody like Usain Bolt? Well, probably not is the answer. Social goal orientation, it focuses on the affiliation then, or sorry, I've gone past that. That was a slide that was repeated. So you've been asked to go and examine the Stanford Prison Experiment this week. Here's what I asked you guys to do, to fill out the questions that were here and have them ready to go for Monday evening so we can have a little bit of a discussion before we jump into the set of notes. But that's it for now. Probably a little bit longer than I would have liked for it to be. I thought we would have probably got through that last set of notes there in 20 minutes. It's turning out that it's probably going to be in around a half an hour. So from Motivation Lecture 1, never a bad idea to be cognizant of what intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is. also be aware of what positive and negative motivation is in relation to sports, but you can also give some of the clinical definitions around that. And then you need to be able to have a good insight into self-determination theory, the interactional approach, the situation and the trait-centered approach as well. So for now, thank you very much, and I shall talk to you next week.